How difficult is Florida State's 2025 schedule? Which road games are the most difficult? And overall, is this easier than the 2024 schedule? Breaking it down right here on Locked On Seminoles.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football writer and recruiting analyst. Thank you once again for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day. Truly appreciate you stopping in to talk some Noles with me. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head over to FanDuel.com to get started. Today's show is 100% about the Florida State football schedule that was just released. Home games that are interesting, the timing of the bye weeks, what the opponents have, some key games like who UF has prior to playing Florida State as compared to Miami, etc. There are a wide variety of differences here. And to be honest, it's a little bit of a unique schedule, in my opinion, if you really look at the details. That part about who the opponents play in particular is something that I'm going to reference several times during the show. But first off, I just want to share my screen, discuss a little bit about what's going on with the schedule, and just let people understand it. For those of you that are listening on Spotify or anything else, I'll go through it slowly, announce the dates and everything. And there are a couple little caveats with it because there are not one, but two Friday night games as well. So without further ado here, I'm going to go ahead and share my schedule for those of you watching this on YouTube. And again, this is a really unique scenario because Florida State, like anybody else, they have some parts of their schedule that are a little easier, parts of their schedule that are a little bit more difficult. But at the same time, I think this is unique because of how the opponents have their games. So we'll get into that next. So here is the schedule as it reads, just from start to finish. As most of you know, 2025 begins with this team called the Alabama Crimson Tide. It is on August 30th, which, by the way, is my birthday. So happy birthday to me. But the next week, they play East Texas A&M. That's a school I, quite honestly, I'm not sure if I'd ever heard of before. That's going to be a win. The odd thing here is that the Noles, after that game, get their first of two byes. Please note that. That is a very important thing. I'll come back to that just one moment. The third game in the fourth week is on September 20th. They play Kent State from the MAC. That is in the state of Ohio. Should be a victory. That's one of the worst programs historically in all of college football. The first road game will be a Friday contest. That means it's going to be a night game. It'll probably be pretty loud in Charlottesville, Virginia, but it's still Virginia. I've got to see them play better than what they have recently for me to be all that concerned. Florida State will play that game on September 26th. Again, that is a Friday contest. That is also a bonus because it's an extra day to prepare before the next game, and that is against the Miami Hurricanes. The Hurricanes come into town. This will be their first road game, by the way, that just to note that. And that is obviously as big a game as there is on the Florida State schedule each and every year. This season will not be any different. Next up is Pittsburgh on the 11th of October. And then we got Stanford, the second road game for the Noles. And ironically, I didn't know this, but the first time the Noles have ever played Stanford in football. How is that possible? It's crazy. No bowl games, no unusual out-of-conference games that have ever been scheduled. First time. So Florida State will play at Stanford in Palo Alto, just outside San Francisco, on the 18th of October. Next, this is really important as well. Again, bye week. They get a bye after Stanford. So they end the month of October at home resting, and then it gets really, really unique. Wake Forest, pretty easy game at home, but then everything else, buckle up because Florida State is not going to get an easy road to go here. First game in November that they play on the road is at Clemson. Cade Klubnik, several good defensive linemen, some speedy receivers and corners. They've got a lot of NFL talent at Clemson still. Dabo's got a pretty good program there after coming off a playoff season. they'll probably be preseason top 10. That might be the most difficult game on Florida State's schedule. Again, that is the 8th of November. The next week, this is a trap game, and I'll come back to this momentarily as well. Virginia Tech, the 15th of November. That is Florida State's senior day. It's after Clemson and before they go to NC State. This is a horrible trap game because Virginia Tech's a solid team. They've got a pretty good quarterback. You are never going to tell me between Clemson and NC State, Florida State is going to get 100% effort from their players against Virginia Tech. This is a name recognition kind of deal, but we'll come back to that as well. Finally, after NC State, and that is a Friday game, that place will be bananas because it'll be a night game. You know how loud it can get if you're a Florida State fan. NC State will be ready to play. They play at Florida the final weekend of the season on a Saturday, the 29th of November. So they got 8 days before the Gators. So a couple of points. I brought up multiple times, hey, here's the game where they play, but then the next week they get a bye. The byes are really important. It's historically been proven that if you get past 6 games that you play in a row without a bye, it's really hard to be good. You're banged up, mental focus, dealing with college kids, etc. So if you look at the schedule, you go through, you get the bye after, again, East Texas A&M, not that they really need it, on the 13th of September. Then they will play 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games in a row. Then they get a bye. So that's pretty good. And then they'll play the final 5. So the byes are in a really, really good time. That's what I'm happy about. But at the same time, what about the teams that they're playing? Florida State is going up against teams that are better, I think, overall in terms of a balanced schedule. You don't play Notre Dame, but you play Alabama. You still play Florida. You still play Clemson. You still play Miami. Virginia Tech is kind of in a weird spot. Pitt is also in a weird spot because it's right after they play Miami. It is a home game, and that's important, but I'm not sure how much they're going to take them serious. Pitt's given Florida State some problems over the years. That's another trap game between Virginia Tech and Pitt. Pick which one you want as your bigger trap game. I'll go Tech because it's before NC State and after Clemson. But those are 2 games where they at least have similar talent to what the Noles have. So those are concerning. And I'm also going to talk about here in just a minute, what are the 4 games before they play against Miami, before they play Clemson, and before they play the Gators? NC State, I know that it's a road game, etc. But I'm just going to go ahead and say this. While they can definitely lose that game after a 2-win season, there's no gimmies. That's a game you got to find a way to win. For whatever reason, in Florida State's history, they have a lot of issues playing in Raleigh, and that's a tough place to play. Their fan base is bananas. I just think that if you're going to show something this year, even if you lost some of the other big games, I kind of have the NC State game circled. If you want, comment. If you disagree with me, if you want to challenge that or say somebody else outside of the obvious, UF, Clemson, Bama, and Miami, those are the 4 premier games on schedule. That's not really all that debatable if you follow college football. Tech, NC State, Pitt are probably the 3 next games. You know, you could throw in Virginia in some capacity or Wake Forest or Stanford because of whatever reason you might think, but those teams are talent-wise definitely way below the other ones. I think Florida State has to find a way to start beating NC State, Virginia Tech, Pitt, and not just winning by like a field. They need to beat these teams bad to get this program going again. I'm curious about those games. It shows mental focus. It shows what you have in terms of talent, the coaching, how much you mesh, all things, quite frankly, that Florida State stunk at last year. Those are things I'm going to look at. And, obviously you still look at the big games too. When we come back, we are going to dive into some questions, some points over what happens with this schedule, the home and the road contests, how they break down, all that next here on Locked On Seminoles. Don't go anywhere. Super 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first TD, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win 200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. All right, let's talk about a few questions and some comments about the schedule, just things that I noticed with it. First off, just the basics. 7 home games, 5 road games. No shock there, but it is standard. As noted earlier, 2 Friday games. A couple of points on that. They're against Virginia and NC State, and it gives those teams what would otherwise be potentially day games. Why does that matter? Well, again, if you followed the Florida State NC State series at all, you know that road games at NC State are not fun. It is deafening in there. You got to use hand signals and a lot of different things. Silent snap counts. It's really hard on offensive linemen. What position does Florida State struggle at the most? Yeah, that would be the offensive line. This is more difficult. Having the Friday game has some edges because you have an extra day to prepare for your next opponent. But playing a Friday game also means a road night game. That sucks for Florida State. Some people will say, well, why is Florida State getting put with these? It's real simple. One word: television. They make all, not part, all of the decisions about who, what, when, where, and why. Florida State is not, right now, whether you want to hear it or not, considered a premier program by some of these television networks, or they wouldn't be playing Friday games. You're not going to see Alabama playing a Friday night game. You're not going to see Notre Dame playing a Friday night game. You are not going to see Penn State playing a Friday night game, Texas, etc. You're not. If Florida State wants to get out of those, and I guarantee you Mike Norvell and his staff do, it's about winning this year. There's no shortcut. It's winning and winning now. You still might end up playing some of those games on the road at night. It's still possible NC State could have been, but there was at least a chance you'd have got the afternoon window, which it's a little easier. You get drunk students that have partied all day, it will be crazy in a night environment in the ACC. Clemson, that's another great example. Miami, whatever. You have to find a way to do better this year to get rid of these. The other problem with Friday games, and this really sucks, it ticks off coaches. If you're playing on Friday, guess what you're not doing? You're not going out scouting. You can't even go to a high school game because you're playing. That sucks. Those kids can't see you play either because they're playing. It's the one thing about the television deal, and I understand why they do it. It's about money, but it is awful for the college football programs and the recruits. Terrible for all parts involved. NC State probably would rather play Florida State home during the afternoon for their program to bring in recruits. But again, they get screwed too. So it's not just FSU that loses out there in that regard. The recruiting aspect of it is lose across the board for Friday games. Next, you get your first 3 games at home. Yeah, I know Bama's the starting game, but it's their first game too. Ward only knows how their quarterback situation is going to work out. Is it Ty Simpson? Is it the kid that they brought in from the state of California that had originally decided to go to Washington? Blah, blah, blah. I have no idea. What I do know is at least you get 3 games in the renovated Doak Campbell Stadium to get things going. And then, playing Miami pretty early in the season at home, that's another nice bonus. They play a lot of games at home to get the offense going, to get the defense coordinator, the staff, everybody together. Road games make it more difficult because you got to plan for more stuff. So with all the new coordination that goes into this, and first years are difficult whenever you've got a coordinator change, even if it's just one, they got 2. That's really hard. It's good that the Noles have a front-loaded schedule with home games. That will be a very important part. Of course, on the other side of that, as I noted when I was reading off the schedule, the back end is not friendly. If Florida State has a back end of the season where they're banged up, it's going to be rough. That is not a friendly way to end the year. There's no way around that. I'm not saying that Florida State is going to be in a scenario where they can't overcome it, but Clemson, NC State, and Florida as 3 of your last 4 games in general is tough, but those 3 games are all on the road with Virginia Tech mixed in between Clemson and NC State. That would probably be one of the 5 to 7 toughest stretches at the end of the season of anybody. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But I think that my gut is they're gonna have some problems there because the physicality of playing those games, all that adding up. The only thing good about it was on the 25th of October, Florida State has a bye, then they play Wake Forest. Let's be honest, Wake is not the most physical of teams. Before you play Clemson in Death Valley, still the Final Four is pretty rough. Now let's talk a little bit about the road games in general. It's pretty standard, but those are the ones everybody, when they look at their favorite team schedule in any sport, okay, who do we play on the road? What's the toughest? How would I rank them? I think it's pretty easy. Clemson is by far the toughest because Death Valley is Death Valley. That is rough. At Florida, the last game, I would put number 2 just ahead of NC State because you got to play them back-to-back. You're going to play a physical game against Clemson, physical game against Tech, physical game against State, then you go to UF. That's rough. NC State would be next. They play them before Florida. I don't think they'll overlook NC State before the Gators because, NC State's got a historically pretty good program. Not great by any means, but I think they'll look at them pretty strongly. Virginia and Stanford, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. If you don't win those games, that's on you. Florida State should smack both those teams. They're not good. I don't care if they play those in the Chancellor of University of Virginia's backyard. Don't care. They stink. Stanford, they stink. You have to win those games. I don't care how much you travel. I don't care who you played the week before. They stink. Find a way to win those games. With that, as far as the big games, who do these teams play? Who do they play before they go play the Noles, like the 4 games leading up? And I bring this, I say 4 games for this reason. From talking to college coaches, high school coaches, being around football my whole life, it's not who you're playing on a weekend. It's how physically ready you are. And I literally mean physically, like who's healthy, mentally, where are you at, all those things because of the chinks in the armor that matter. And I'll just give you an easy example here. UF's back into their schedule before they host Florida State is not friendly. It's not quite as bad as it was last year, but it's still pretty tough. This is what UF has leading into playing the Noles. On the first game of the Final Four that they play before the Noles, they play Georgia, neutral site, at Kentucky, at Ole Miss, home to Tennessee, and then they immediately will play Florida State. I mean, again, they play Georgia. They always play them in Jacksonville or whatever. Play at Kentucky. They're not good, but they're physical. Ask Ole Miss. They beat Ole Miss on the road last year. Then they go to Ole Miss, ironically, and then they host Tennessee before hosting Florida State. That is going to be rough. Do I think Florida is better than Florida State this year? Yeah. Are they at home? Yeah. All those things. But their schedule might be the most difficult in November again this year. Let's see how much they have in the tank to play against Florida State. Anytime you look at a rivalry game, there are certain things. Oh, throw them out there, throw them out the win. Look, the number one thing that Vegas looks at, especially for you gamblers, the number one thing, who the heck is playing? And to that point, a quick note. If you're going to bet, or FanDuel, whatever it is you're doing, that's great. Never, ever, ever, ever trust any press conference that a head coach has with injury information. Zero. Ever, ever, ever. Never forget that. That being the case, that's where FanDuel or anybody else that sets these lines and moves them, you're like, what's going on? We haven't heard anything. Yeah, they have inside contacts. These games like UF and Florida State at the end, after these gauntlets, there's going to be injuries that are lied about until the end of time. And that's why they're so difficult to predict. DJ Wagway will do anything he can. I just throw it out there as an example. If he's got a bum ankle, do you really think that Billy Napier is going to talk about it ad nauseum? No. But you going through that schedule, again, you got Kentucky after Georgia, you got Tennessee, you got Ole Miss on the road. Like, he's going to be beat up. But how much? There's no way to gauge that, and it just makes it really, really interesting. Looking at the schedules overall, I'm not sure which one that I think is more interesting, Clemson or Miami. We're going to talk about those in a second because their schedules before they play FSU are a little bit different. Excuse me. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Seminoles. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes are waiting and wondering and worrying if you're going to get any money back. And then waiting, wandering, worrying, some more. Now with your taxes, it's matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives you taxes and your undivided attention as they work on your return while you get the real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find everything that they need to get the deductions possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. This is how your taxes should be done. Get an expert now with TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Which one's got the more difficult write-up prior to the Noles playing them? Is it the Canes, or is it going to be that trip to Death Valley? The answer, in my opinion, is probably Clemson. So let's talk a little bit about them. They're 4 games before this. It's iffy, but they're 4 games before. Depends on how you want to look at it. I think it's for a different reason here. They play at BC. They're going to win that game. SMU, after their game against Penn State, a lot of people are probably going to take them lightly. I guarantee you their quarterback's going to get better. They get an open date, and then they play Duke. You're like, Brian, that's pretty easy. Do not sleep on Duke. Do not. They are coached well. That head coach there didn't have a lot of respect when he was the head man down in Coral Gables. He's figured it out. He had 9 games last year. He won at Duke. And they went and got the kid, Mensah, from Tulane. They play them before they play Florida State. They take Duke lightly. I don't think they will. Manny is hated by Miami fans, but I don't think like the current players and all that care, and Mario doesn't. That's one thing. But Clemson, they know him because they just play him every year. They'll just respect him or whatever, but they're not going to get their kids out for him. But at least there's a chance for Mario in that one if they'd have been reversed. But it's not. Clemson is going to play against Duke the week before they play Florida State. It's going to be helpful. Yeah, I get the open date. That's pretty good for Clemson. Duke is the underrated game that's going to help Florida State at least a little bit there. As for Miami, it's a little bit bizarre, but they've got a tougher game to start the year. They started home with Notre Dame. That's one of the biggest games of the college football season on week 1. They got Bethune-Cookman, who they play quite often. They play USF. Then they play the Gators at home, and then they make their first road trip to Tallahassee. So not only do you have Notre Dame and UF, you've got another game, a team that has no respect amongst the state, and they always have a chip on their shoulder. You got USF, and I know they got the Bethune-Cookman game. Miami, but I still lean Duke because I don't know what people are going to think about them, but I'm just telling you, there's no way Dabo is going to get them up for Duke. In a way, I guess if they play really bad, it could be poor for Florida State, but I think that'll be a really physical game. It'll beat them up. I think Florida's a physical game. Don't get me wrong, but USF won't be. I think they'll smoke them. They'll be emotional. That'll be a game for a quarter and a half against Miami, but they have too much speed, too much size up front. They'll run them over. That Duke game, I'm telling you, it's sneaky, and I understand if you want to pick Florida being a different kind of deal, so you go Miami's more difficult, but I lean Clemson because SMU's underrated and Duke's underrated. Those will not be fun games to play. Dabo is going to have a hard time getting his team up emotionally for those games. They'll be looking past. It could be kind of goofy, especially if they play a game into the fourth quarter against Duke one way or the other. How are they emotionally before they play against the Noles? I don't know. I could be dead wrong. If you have an opinion on it, sure, fire away. Let me know what you think down below in the comments on YouTube. Love to hear what you have to think about that situation. As for the overall schedule in general, just want to make a couple other points here. It's not like way out of the box hard, but it's not super easy. The schedule, the biggest bonus, I think, again, as I noted earlier, I like where they have at least some help with the bye weeks. The one right after East Texas A&M, that's iffy, but it is what it is. But the other one's more important. Florida State getting a bye right after their game against Stanford. That's a road game across the country. You got to fly to the San Francisco Bay Area. That's a good time to get a bye, especially not because they're playing Wake next, but they got that 4-game gauntlet again. Clemson on the road, Virginia Tech at home, and then the final 2 games on the road against NC State and UF. Needed a bye before going down that gauntlet. I think that would be pretty interesting. Once again, I also think that this schedule is one that is somewhat manageable. I think as far as predictions go, minimum, they should win 6 games. Minimum. I want to see how they play against Pittsburgh. I want to see how they play against Virginia Tech. To a certain degree, Virginia, it's a road game, but you have to win those kind of games. If they get beat by Florida or Clemson or Bama, those aren't shocking because those are good football teams. But anybody outside of those 3 that you sit there and you look at the schedule and you're like, which teams on this schedule do we not have more talent? And I would say none. I think the Bama, Clemson, and Florida have more talent. NC State, Virginia Tech, Pitt, or at least in the realm, but I still don't think they do. Miami, of course, too. There's maybe 4 teams on the schedule that have more talent. If you can't win at least 6, did the staff do a good job? I don't know. I would lean no. You're going to have a couple close games that go against you or for you on a given schedule. So there's really no reason for the Noles not to go to a bowl game this next year. And I'm going to project that most people pick the Noles to win 7 or 8 games, especially Florida State fans. You'll be optimistic. And I'm going to guess that FanDuel and some of those companies that put out the different over-unders will put this at 7.5 tops, 6.5 low end. It'll be somewhere in there. Again, if you can't win at least 6 games and go to a bowl game, there's something wrong. So it's an interesting schedule. Let me know once again what you think. Make a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day. I truly appreciate you stopping in to talk some Noles with me. I will see you again tomorrow. Thank you very much. Talk to you soon.